everyone, this is Michelle Hoskin and I'm joined today by Kate Ryan from IBB Law, and we're going to talk to you about the Domestic Abuse Bill and the Act and the changes that's recently come into legislation. Kate will give you a little introduction into herself in a second, but I just want to say why we're doing this little video, and it's because the work that we've been doing as an organisation at Standards International in an attempt to train and educate professional advisors in the area of financial abuse has obviously thrown up quite a lot of learning for myself and for our team here, and one of those pieces of learning was around the domestic abuse. So Kate, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So give the audience a little bit of a sort of a spin through Kate and also a little bit about IBB Law.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. My name's Kate Ryan. I'm a family lawyer and a partner at IBB Law. IBB Law is a full service law firm. We are situated in Thames Valley. We offer a full range of private client services and commercial services as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Just a bit of an introduction. So if any of you listening and watching feel that there's some benefit in catching up or speaking to Kate or any of her team, then obviously her contact details will be in the details below. So Kate, tell me about the Domestic Abuse Bill and the changes and what that actually means in and around the whole piece around financial abuse.
So this is a really important piece of legislation, as you well know. It became law on the 3rd of March 2020, and at its core is to raise awareness of the area of domestic abuse, which includes coercive control, which now includes financial control within its actual definition. It seeks to promote awareness of this very important topic, to try and transform the justice system, both the family and the criminal system, and to ensure that by its offering definitions of domestic abuse, which within the Act means any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence or abuse towards a partner or a family member. By having that definition, what the Act does is it seeks recognition of this really important area, so that there is more awareness and a clearer channel and structure for the agencies that need to work with the victims who are victims of domestic abuse through this very difficult time. And before March 2020, this did not exist. So it's a long-awaited piece of legislation which everyone involved, people like me and those within the government and those people that work with charities and agencies, really hope this provides some core framework for the victims and educates the agencies around it so that they are better placed to help the victim.
Yeah, wonderful. And you mentioned just before we would just be doing another brief video for our certification program course, but you mentioned about it being a landmark case. Just explain kind of, we hear that kind of in the movies, I guess, when you're watching these kind of law movies. Explain what that actually means.
So yeah, the bill is, there was the draft domestic abuse bill before it became the domestic abuse bill, and it's also known as a landmark piece of legislation because of what it seeks to achieve with regards to financial control within the definition of coercive control, and making this type of behaviour a criminal offence. And raising the awareness at a multi-level, I suppose. It doesn't just define the behaviours that constitute a criminal act or what the behaviours are. It also sets out a mission of trying to deal with this area of domestic abuse. There is a minister within the government whose role is to deal with domestic abuse. There are, within the framework of the Act, all sorts of regulations for social services, the police, the agencies that we need to rely on. So they are in a position where they also know what their obligations are in order to support victims, and I think early intervention of things like financial control at as early an opportunity as possible, which then obviously helps protect the victim and stops them being led back into this abusive pattern of behaviour or relationship. So that is often why it's known as or referenced as a landmark piece of legislation, because of what it seeks to achieve and the goals that are at its very heart.
Yeah. So I think just for the benefit of kind of those that are watching this, because we're going to try and keep this short and punchy, but the definition of domestic abuse. So before we created the certification program, this is the financial abuse certification. I would consider myself an intelligent young lady. Young, I wish. But where I kind of was a bit worldly aware of stuff like this, but actually, even I misunderstood the definition of domestic abuse in terms of, because when you kindly sent me over the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 to read, and I did, and I read it fully, and I've actually thoroughly enjoyed reading it, as I mentioned to you earlier. But domestic abuse, and I'll just read it as it says it in the Act, behaviour is abusive if it consists of any of the following: physical or sexual abuse, violent or threatening behaviour, controlling or coercive behaviour, economic abuse, which includes financial abuse, and there's a subclause for that, and psychological, emotional, or other abuse. That is vast, right? And one of the things that we've spoken about is this piece, and I didn't really sometimes when I say these things and I realise how I feel about them, but all of those aspects of forms of abuse, for me, are underpinned by this piece around coercive control. It's like the thing that holds it all up. Like, because, for example, let's use financial abuse as an example. If somebody is coercively controlled, but it is being financially abused, if somebody walked up to me, I was in a relationship and said, give me £1,000, and it had never happened before and it didn't happen after, I would feel it was a bit odd. I wouldn't feel it was abuse, okay? But if someone's coercively controlled me, drip, 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 and then they ask me for £1,000, I'll probably brush that £1,000 under the carpet. So just share, because I loved it when you just did the little recording earlier about this piece around the pattern, which you talked about, because that for me was that sort of was the cherry on the cake for me. Just explain that a bit further.
Yeah, well, I think one of the main things about why this act has come into why it's now law, the importance behind why it needed to be made legislation, is because there was an element in a relationship that was the unknown, because it wasn't physical, sexual, actual aggression towards somebody that could be pinpointed as some form of abuse.
Yeah.
And actually what we know has been happening for many, many years is a lot more people have been suffering with subtle patterns of behaviour over the course of their relationship, sometimes for years and years and years, that amounts to coercive control, but not in the sense that we perhaps may used to think about what domestic abuse was, which is, somebody actually being physically aggressive or threatening towards somebody. So what's important about coercive control is, number one, that it's defined within the Act and it is now under the umbrella of domestic abuse, which is really important, but that also it is recognised by the courts, and I've seen this firsthand, that coercive control is a often subtle form of pattern of behaviour over the course of years that impacts a person that is controlling or coercive, whether it's stopping them seeing their family and friends, telling them what they can wear, where they can go, checking their phone, their social media, controlling their finances. All of those things are now fully recognised as domestic abuse, which it was never before, and that's actually really, really important for the victim and for those of us that are involved, often at the very first meeting or at the front end of these people coming forward to say that they are experiencing this sort of behaviour in their relationship. So that's why it's so important.
And it's the pattern. It's one-off. It is a thing. but it's the abuse aspect is the drip, 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 drip pattern of regular, whatever regular means. It could be once a year, once a month, but if it's happening more than once, it would deem to be a pattern.
Yeah, it's coercive controls, often defined as domestic abuse, in which a perpetrator subjects a spouse or a partner or a close relative to a sustained pattern of controlling, threatening, or humiliating behaviour. Is often how it's described, which I know happens. You see that happening within your field, and then you see the impact that has on the individual. Which is why something like the domestic abuse legislation is so important, because there needs to be a framework there for professionals and the victims to be able to use to ensure this is dealt with in the right way.
Yeah, I think it would be it would be remiss of us not to throw some stats in all of this, because I think, you know, through our work, through my learning, you know, there's a couple of key stats that always put into my mind really is, you know, let's use the act as the basis. So, you know, economic abuse, the way I describe it is when somebody, let's say I'm A and you're B, where A either exploits, sabotages, or restricts your access to economic resources like food, technology, housing, money, whatever it might be. Financial abuse clearly is the piece around the money in economic abuse. And some of the stats that we were sharing earlier, and I picked this up from a paper that you championed within IBB Law, which I'm going to share, you know, with the group. You know, it was something like 24% of those that you surveyed, males, of those that were in that research paper, 24% of them said that their partner, their intimate partner, had actually restricted their access to food as a way of coercive control. It blows my mind. It blows my mind, right? And then I think, and then it's 20% of the women, the males were using a restriction of food, restricting their economic abuse, their economic resources. A couple of stats to throw in, you know, that, you know, globally, the stats vary depending on the research paper, but roughly, you know, it's 1 in 4 women will experience some form of domestic abuse, economic abuse in their lifetime, and it's 1 in 7 men. We touched on before around the fact that I don't believe it's 1 in 7 men. I think it's just 1 in 7 men that we know about. And the likelihood is it isn't 1 in 4 women either. It's probably more like 1 in 3, 1 in 2, and higher on both counts. But the figure that sort of shocked me, knowing that this the pandemic that we've been through, is that the charity of Refuge, the Refuge charity, has recorded a 61% increase in calls and reach outs to them since Feb 2020 to April 2021, and that's the height of COVID, because abusers always work from home, right? And you know, this is not something that is going to go away. And actually, I honestly believe, Kate, that this is the modern day abuse. You know, years ago when I was a child, I suppose it was like sexual abuse, physical abuse. That was what was on the mainstream. But this is like the covert. It's, you know, there was a word, I think there was one of the words that actually one of your lawyers used when I met them, and it was insidious. I think that was the word they used. And that's, just explain insidious to me, like, and to because it's a word I'd never actually heard before. You know, is that the covert piece of it?
Yeah, it's the sort of subtle, calculated behavior that creeps into every area of your relationship, that you then can't get rid of, because it's ingrained in your day-to-day life. And that might sound dramatic, but it happens. It genuinely happens more than we would like to think. And I obviously, given what I do, see that firsthand. And it is unbelievable that there are people that live in that way with the behaviour they put up with, and think that it's acceptable. It changes them. It really does change their personality, their character, until they finally realise that there is an option of getting out if that's what they choose to do. And you know, that's where this act, where people like me and you come in to really help guide and support them and make them feel like this is not an abnormal situation for them to be in, and that there is help for them to enable them to transition.
Absolutely. So look, a couple of, because I want to keep this short and sweet, and I know because we've just done an hours long video interview for the program, for the training program, but but by way of summary, I think, if the stats are right, okay, and we are two women, right? We are, we're mums, we've got friends, we've got families. If the stats are right, we only have to look in our immediate circle of people to be able, if we thought hard enough, and actually probably not hard, we don't need to think that hard, to spot where there is behaviors that are a little bit odd. I mean, even a girlfriend of mine last week, and she said things to me before, and I have spoken to her about this. She drives around in a clapped out car. Her husband drives around in a Porsche. She will not buy clothes full price. She won't justify having her hair done, and he's literally top to toe in designer, and that's coercive control in my mind, because he is so calculated at it, right, that he now has coerced her so much that she now controls herself. Right. And that is like the ultimate of power. He doesn't need to, if he spoke no more and said nothing else, she now has become so controlling of her own way. And that happens men and women and all genders, I would suspect, right, when it's really ingrained. It's the point you made there. So look,
yeah, absolutely.
So I think, Kate, is there anything else particularly that you feel we haven't touched on, that, for this kind of whistle stop tour through the act, has been, that we haven't touched on, we haven't mentioned?
I don't think so. I can quickly give you a very quick summary of why this act is so important. Okay, so number one, it promotes the awareness of domestic abuse. It provides the new domestic abuse protection notice order, which is really important. It seeks to transform the justice system so that victims are better protected when they're giving their evidence about the perpetrator. And it defines coercive controlling behaviour as domestic abuse. And it seeks to provide a framework for all of the agencies, police, social services, other professionals, to help support the victims. So the victim is at the heart of this, and it really wants to try and ensure that we as a society are aware of this issue and can help that victim if they come forward, and even if at the very first stage of reporting what's been going on. So that is they're the key elements to this bill and why it's so important.
Yeah, and I'll just say as a reminder, really, because of what we've said so much, really, it's physical, it's sexual, it's violent, it's threatening, it's controlling, it's coercive, it's economic, it's financial, it's psychological, emotional, and or other forms of abuse. It falls within the domestic abuse. This is not about just physical violence. This is about a collective, very, very devastating forms of abuse, and it's happening just on one thing, because I meant to say it earlier and it totally slipped my mind. I did an interview this morning for a financial advisor she asked me to do an interview to her audience. She's a financial planner with a podcast. And she said, what are the triggers? And I know, 6 months ago, I'd have rattled off, well, when this happens and when this happens is a trigger. And actually, I said to her, honestly, it's all the time in every aspect of our lives. And you've almost summed that up beautifully by saying it's so ingrained in all of our actions, how we live. It's so subtle. It's interesting. Like, I've been in relationships before where I've come down the stairs, in an outfit, and I've probably done it to the boyfriend and said, well, I don't like you in that. Right. So and I've probably gone, you're not going out like that, are you? Like, and you're not going to put those shoes on with them trousers because you clearly have no way of dressing yourself, kind of thing, right? So it's interesting. It's like, where's the line,
but
right?
Then I think, yeah, absolutely, and we are all guilty of that, let's be honest. But I think the people that are perpetrators of this financial control, coercive control, they are a certain personality type, and they what they then go on to do is probably something that you would never think of doing.
No.
So they would probably literally then, they wouldn't go out, they would stop, they would put an end to whatever it was they were going to do, and make that other person feel like it was their fault. Yeah. It would then go on to the next day, where they would be constantly reminded that they did that, and they would be humiliated and belittled. Whereas what we're talking about, but it's really important to point out, because we do have to draw the line, because if we're seeing clients that are coming to us and we want to advise them about, is this financial control, is this domestic abuse, there does need to be a certain element of sustainability and consistency of behaviour throughout the course of the relationship that's resulted in them having a certain an impact, whether it's emotional or physical or whatever it might be. So that again, though, brings us right back to why this act is so important, because it helps to give us the guidance on that.
I get it.
Can you believe it? It only came into force on the 3rd of March 2020, and prior to this, none of this framework, these definitions, the options for the victims, and the consequences for the perpetrators existed. There was obviously a criminal sanctions for physical abuse, and in family law there is help within the court system for injunctions and injunctive relief. But this is totally different. This is a much broader approach.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous, and I think we'll wrap up, because I think, you know, we could keep talking and talking and talking for hours about it, because it's such a massive subject. Just by way of close, so, you know, one of the reasons that I personally got involved in this whole subject was because, you know, we teach, we train, you know, we assess and we certify financial planners against various standards of best practice. And when I established that this is an area that was real, this was a real thing, yet my clients, our advisors, had no real understanding or knowledge or understanding of signposting or skills that they needed in this area, given the fact that the thing they talk about with their clients all day, every day, is money. Yeah, it shocked me. So for a standards body to create a certification and a standard in financial abuse effectively was massively important to me personally, and the work that we are doing, and it's just gone from strength to strength, and the awareness is, you know, is raising. So I think, you know, thank you so much, Kate, for sharing, you know, your expertise. All the links and the information and the links to IBB Law will definitely be, you know, included in the post and stuff when we share this. But if any of you watching this, listening to this, you know, have been triggered by this, you know, have feeling that there is more to be said, there's more for you to find out, then please reach out to myself or Kate. Our details will be in the post, and we would be delighted to have conversations with you further. So Kate, once again, thank you so much. You're super smart, super awesome, and you know, I'm glad that we share this passion to try and bring this to an absolute stop. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.